Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Continuing with consciousness, sense-certainty. The force of its truth thus lies now in the I, in the immediacy of my seeing, hearing, and so on. The vanishing of the single now and here that we mean is prevented by the fact that I hold them fast. Now is day because I see it. Here is a tree for the same reason. But in this relationship, sense-certainty experiences the same dialectic acting upon itself as in the previous one. I see the tree and assert that here is a tree, but another I sees the house and maintains that here is not a tree, but a house instead. Both truths have the same authentication, namely the immediacy of seeing, and the certainty and assurance that both have about their knowing, but the one truth vanishes in the other. What does not appear in all this is the I as universal, whose seeing is neither a seeing of the tree nor of this house, but is a simple seeing which, though mediated by the negation of this house, etc., is all the same simple and indifferent to whatever happens in it, to the house, the tree, etc. The I is merely universal, like now, here, or this in general. I do indeed mean a single I, but I can no more say what I mean in the case of I than I can in the case of now. And here, when I say this here, this now, or a single item, I am saying all thises, heres, nows, all single items. Similarly, when I say I, this singular I say in general all I's. Everyone is what I say everyone is. I, this singular I. When science is faced with a demand, as if it were an acid test, it could not pass, that it should deduce, construct, find a priori, or however it is put, something called this thing or this one man, it is reasonable that the demand should say which this thing or which this particular man is meant. But it is impossible to say this. Sense certainty thus comes to know by experience that its essence is neither in the object nor in the I, and that its immediacy is neither an immediacy of the one nor of the other. For in both what I mean is rather something unessential, and the object and the I are universals in which the now and here and I, which I mean do not have a continuing being, or are not. Thus we reach the stage where we have to posit the whole of sense certainty itself as its essence, and no longer only one of its moments, as happened in the two cases where first the object confronting it, the I, and then the I was supposed to be its reality. Thus it is only sense certainty as a whole which stands firm within itself as immediacy, and by so doing excludes from itself all the opposition which has hitherto obtained. This pure immediacy, therefore, no longer has any concern with the otherness of the here as a tree which passes over into a here that is not a tree, or with the otherness of the now as day which changes into a now that is night, or with another I for which something else is an object. Its truth preserves itself as a relation that remains self-identical and which makes no distinction of what is essential and what is unessential between the I and the object, a relation therefore into which also no distinction whatever can penetrate. This I assert then that the here as a tree, and do not turn round so that the here would become for me not a tree. Also I take no notice of the fact that another I sees the here as not a tree, or that I myself at another time take the here as not tree, the now as not day. On the contrary, I am pure act of intuiting. For my part, stick to the fact that the now is day, or that the here is a tree. Also, I do not compare here and now themselves with one another, but stick firmly to one immediate relation, the now is day. Since then, this certainty will no longer come forth to us when we direct its attention to a now that is night, or to an I to whom it is night. We will approach it and let ourselves point to the now that is asserted. We must let ourselves point to it. For the truth of this immediate relation is the truth of this I, which confines itself to one now or one here. Were we to examine the truth afterwards, or stand at a distance from it, it should lose its significance entirely, for that would do away with the immediacy which is essential to it. We must therefore into the same point of time and space, point them out to ourselves, make ourselves into the same singular I, which is the one who knows with certainty. Let us then see how the immediate is constituted that is pointed out to us. The now is pointed to this now. Now it has already ceased to be in the act of pointing to it. The now that is another now than the one pointed to, and we see that the now is just this, to be no more just when it is. The now as it is pointed out to us is now that has been, and this is its truth. It is not the truth of being, yet this much is true, that it has been. But what essentially has been is, in fact, not an essence, but is. It is not an essence that is. It is not, and it is. It was with being that we were concerned. In this pointing out, then, we see merely a movement which takes the following course. 1. I point out the now, and it is asserted to be the truth. I point it out, however, as something that has been, or as something that has been superseded. I set aside the first truth. 2. I now assert as a second truth that it has been, that it is superseded. 3. But what has been is not. I set aside the second truth, its having been, its supersession, and thereby negate the negation of the now, and thus return to the first assertion, that the now is. The now and pointing out the now are thus so constituted that neither the one nor the other is something immediate and simple, but a movement which contains various moments. This is posited, but it is rather an other that is posited, or the this is superseded, and this otherness, or the setting aside of the first, is its if in turn set aside, and so has returned into the first. However, the first, thus reflected into itself, is not exactly the same as it was to begin with, namely something immediate. On the contrary, it is something that is reflected into itself, or a simple entity which in its otherness remains what it is, a now which is an absolute plurality of nows, and this is the genuine now. The now is a simple day which contains within it many nows, hours. A now of this sort, an hour, similarly, is many minutes, and this now is likewise many nows, and so on. The pointing out of the now is thus itself the movement which expresses what the now is in truth, viz., a result, or a plurality of nows all taken together, and the pointing out is the experience of learning that now is a universal. The here pointed out, to which I hold fast, is similarly a this here, which in fact is not this here, but a before and behind and above and below, a right and left. The above is itself similarly this manifold otherness of above, below, etc. The here which was supposed to have been pointed out vanishes in other heres, but these likewise vanish. What is pointed out, held fast and abides, is a negative. This which is negative only when the heres are taken as they should be, but in being so taken they supersede themselves. What abides is a simple complex of many heres. The here that is meant would be the point, but it is not. On the contrary, when it is pointed out as something that is, the pointing out shows itself to be not an immediate knowing of the point, but a movement from the here that is meant through many heres into the universal here, which is a simple plurality of heres, just as the day is a simple plurality of nows. It is clear that the dialectic of sense certainty is nothing else but the simple history of its movement or of its experience, and sense certainty itself is nothing else but just this history. That is why the natural consciousness too is always reaching this result, learning from experience what is true in it, but equally it is always forgetting it and starting the movement all over again. It is therefore astonishing when, in face of this experience, it is asserted as universal experience and put forward too as a philosophical proposition, even as the outcome of skepticism, that the reality of being of external things taken as thises or sense objects has absolute truth for consciousness. To make such an assertion is not to know what one is saying, to be unaware that one is saying the opposite of what one wants to say. The truth for consciousness of this over this of sense is supposed to be a universal experience, but the very opposite is universal experience. Every consciousness itself supersedes such a truth, as for example, here is a tree, or now is noon, and proclaims the opposite. Here is not a tree, but a house. And similarly, it immediately again supersedes the assertion which sets aside the first so far as it is also just such an assertion of a sensuous this, and what consciousness will learn from experience in all sense certainty is in truth only what we have seen, namely the this as a universal, the very opposite of what that assertion affirmed to be universal experience. With this appeal to universal experience, we may be permitted to anticipate how the case stands in the practical sphere. In this respect, we can still tell those who assert the truth and certainty of the reality of sense objects that they should go back to the most elementary school of wisdom, namely the ancient Eleusinian mysteries of Ceres and Bacchus, and that they have still to learn the secret meaning of the eating of bread and drinking of wine, for he who is initiated into these mysteries not only comes to doubt the being of sensuous things, but to despair of it. In part he brings about the nothingness of such things himself in his dealings with them, and in part he sees them reduce themselves to nothingness. Even the animals are not shut out from this wisdom, but on the contrary show themselves to be most profoundly initiated into it. For they do not just stand idly by in front of sensuous things, as if these possess intrinsic being, but despairing of their reality and completely assured of their nothingness, they fall to without ceremony and set them up. And all nature, like the animals, celebrates these open mysteries which teach the truth about sensuous things. But just as our previous remarks would suggest, those who put forward such an assertion also themselves say the direct opposite of what they mean, a phenomenon which is perhaps best calculated to induce them to reflect on the nature of sense certainty. They speak of the existence of external objects, which can be more precisely defined as actual, absolute, singular, wholly, personal, individual things, each of them absolutely unlike anything else. This existence, they say, has absolute certainty and truth. They mean this bit of paper on which I am writing, or rather have written this, but what they mean is not what they say. If they actually wanted to say this bit of paper, which they mean, if they wanted to say it, then this is impossible, because the sensuous this that is meant cannot be reached by language, which belongs to consciousness, that is, to that which is inherently universal. In the actual attempt to say it, it would therefore crumble away. Those who started to describe it would not be able to complete the description, but would be compelled to leave it to others, who would themselves finally have it to admit to speaking about something which is not. They certainly mean, then, this bit of paper here, which is quite different from the bit mentioned above, but they say actual things, external or sensuous objects, absolutely singular entities, and so on. That is, they say of them only what is universal. Consequently, what is called the unutterable is nothing else than the untrue, the irrational, what is merely meant but is not actually expressed. If nothing more is said of something than it is an actual thing, an external object, its description is only the most abstract of generalities and in fact expresses its sameness with everything rather than its distinctiveness. When I say a singular thing, I am really saying what it is from a wholly universal point of view. For everything is a singular thing, and likewise the thing is anything you like. If we describe it more exactly as this bit of paper, then each and every bit of paper is this bit of paper, and I have only uttered the universal all the time. But if I want to help out language, which has the divine nature of directly reversing the meaning of what is said, of making it into something else, and thus not letting what is meant to get into words at all, by pointing out this bit of paper, experience teaches me what the truth of sense certainty in fact is. I point it out as here, which is a here of other heres, or is in its own self a simple togetherness of many heres. That is, it is universal. I take it up then as it is in truth, and instead of knowing something immediate, I take the truth of it, or perceive it if nothing more is said of something than it is an actual thing, an external object. Its description is only the most abstract of generalities, and in fact expresses its sameness with everything rather than its distinctiveness. When I say a single thing, I am really saying what it is from a wholly universal point of view, for everything is a single thing, and likewise this thing is anything you like. If we describe it more exactly as this bit of paper, then each and every bit of paper is this bit of paper, and I have only uttered the universal all the time. But if I want to help out language, which has the divine nature of directly reversing the meaning of what is said, of making it into something else, and thus not letting what is meant get into the words at all, by pointing out this bit of paper, experience teaches me what the truth of sense certainty in fact is. I point it out as a here, which is a here of other heres, or is in its own self a simple togetherness of many heres. It is a universal. I take it up then as it is in truth, and instead of knowing something immediate, I take the truth of it or perceive it.